we are here talking about veterans, and I understand, I actually know very well that you served in the military. Will you share with us which branch of the military you served in?
I spent a lot of years in the United States Marine Corps. And when I joined, I was there from 79 to 88. And then I did almost 2 years in the reserves afterwards. Didn't have to, but chose to. So it did, yeah, a lot of active duty, Marine Corps.
Wow, that's awesome, John. And thank you for your service, as
Oh,
I'm
you're welcome.
sure you often hear. So, what was your rank when you left?
I was a sergeant in the enlisted ranks. That was an E5, E5, kind of like right in the middle, because E9 is
That's
as high as you go. I was right in the middle.
so. Do you remember back when you first joined? What were some of the circumstances? How'd you make the decision to enlist?
It was at one of those points in our history. We were after Vietnam. Nothing was really, it was kind of like the Cold War time. The two reasons I enlisted. One, I always wanted to be a pilot in maybe even an astronaut. And to be an astronaut, you had to be an officer, and most of them at that time, astronauts, were pilots. And I grew up with the airlines because my dad retired the airlines. And so I tried to go to the Air Force Academy. That was what I wanted. But for whatever reason, me and the SAT and the ACT test just did not get along. Even though I was in National Honor Society in high school and so forth, but it just didn't get along. So what better way to do it? My really good friend in high school was enlisting in the Marine Corps, and I was with him one day when I was at the recruiting station. And they said,
And
"Well,
there you
John, you
go.
could you could join the Marine Corps. You could go become a pilot. You could do it afterwards." Yeah, they got me. So
Yeah.
my friend and I went what we called the buddy program, Marine Corps.
Okay, that's nice. And how apropos when you're talking about taking exams. Sorry, I just little side note
Oh
as you said
yeah,
that some of the most successful people are not great test takers, and you're just such a great example, John. I just love that comment as we talk about
yeah. It
preparing
just
for a real estate exam. But anyhow, just
it
yeah,
didn't
but
work.
it didn't work. But look at you now. You've just had an amazing career.
Thank
So
you.
do you remember, or could you share maybe one of your most memorable experiences during your time serving?
I re-enlisted after 3 years. And when I re-enlisted, I had some options. Naturally, you do that. They said, "What do you want? What kind of duty station?" The commander I was working for at the time, he wasn't enlisted. He became an officer. When he was enlisted, he was a drill instructor, which is they're the trainers of recruits in the Marine Corps. And of course, he was had a lot of influence at that point in time. And he said, "Sergeant Winter, why don't you think of," or actually at the time I was a corporal. He said, "Why don't you think about going to DI school?" Which I was at Camp Pendleton, Oceanside. And when I re-enlisted, I re-enlisted to go to the drill field. And I spent 3 years there, May of 82 to May of 85, training recruits. It probably was one of the most spectacular duty stations I've ever had, watching training. They say you never forget your drill instructors. Even to this day, I'll be 64
Yeah.
very soon, and I can tell you who my drill instructors were back in 1979. And 45 years ago. And so to me, it was probably training recruits. Was that 3 year window was just, it was so special before I enlisted or after I enlisted. And because I did a 6 year enlistment the second go around, and it really
Mhm.
was, it's a special duty. And it just, it, it changed me the way I deal with people, how I work with people, taught me how to work with people. So I would say
That's
training recruits
amazing.
was probably one of the best duty stations I've ever had.
Gosh, John, I literally have goosebumps. I have chills running through my body. Just really awesome. And then look where your sort of path has taken you. Just really cool. Do you remember what your first job was when you left the military?
When I re-enlisted, I got a scholarship to University in San Diego because that's where I ended up going and training recruits was San Diego. Being there, I had that scholarship, and I always wanted to go to college. That was another reasons why I enlisted because I had older siblings, and mom and dad said they just didn't have money for college. We were a family of 6 kids, and so and even though I was the only one out of 6 kids that was a student of grades and National Honor Society and all that in high school. I started going to night school while I was training recruits, and I kept going. And one of my very last classes, it was right before the end of my 6-year second enlistment. There was somebody that was in my class, and she was working on a master's degree. I was finishing my senior year in college. It was a combined class, and she was a manager at an aerospace company in San Diego, and she happened to make a comment during break about a job opening. And I knew I was getting out. I was going to leave and and she says, "Why don't you come by for an interview?" And so I sat with the supervisor that worked for her. She says, "If he likes you," well, come to find out, he was a retired Marine Corps colonel, mentor for contracts and pricing, because my bachelor's degree is pre-law and math, and wanted to go to law school, and so he taught me how to do contracts and negotiation. And so I spent almost 4 years under him being mentored in aerospace, because they are very large. A lot of people would know the parts that were on planes, but I got to work on the B-1 bomber. I got to work on special aircraft, some commercial aircraft, and it opened my world up. So I always wanted to be a pilot. I went to the aerospace a different way, and so that's out of the Marine Corps. I got my degree, and it put me in the aerospace industry, because it was right there. And so almost 10 years in the aerospace industry.
Wow.
But that was
just fascinating.
The people you meet, and you never know what will happen. And that was one of them.
Yeah. It's really just fascinating. And then you got into real estate. So how did that happen? How did that transition happen?
I look back, it's 30 years this year. As a matter of fact, I have my original real estate license sitting here, a copy on it. And I got my license October 1st, 30 years ago. And people ask me that question. It's like, you've been doing this now 30 years. And it's like, I did. I was in the aerospace industry. We had moved, my wife and we moved. And she says, "Get me out of Michigan," because she hated the snow and the cold. And I used to go to Arizona for negotiations, because there's a big helicopter plant. It's where they make the Apache helicopter down here. And my wife always wanted to do real estate. And I brought her on a trip once to Phoenix, and she fell in love with it, because it was during July, it was a heat. And she goes, "We can do real estate in Arizona." I never had any desire to do real estate, didn't know I wanted to do it 30 years ago. But my wife always wanted to do something. I said, "Let's just do it." So the person that sold our house in Grand Rapids, Michigan, was also licensed in Arizona. And he was with a company called Pinnacle Peak Realty, which is no longer. It got bought up by Coldwell Banker many years ago. And he put us into contact with the broker, the owners of that company. And when we came here, we went to real estate school, had no desire. I had no clue I was going to do this. And we ended up in Pinnacle Peak area. The hiring manager looked at me and says, "Why should I hire you?" And I said, "Because we just sold our house over almost 2,500 miles away. We came here to sell real estate to work at your company." And he says, "Well, that's a good answer." He says, "And you're hired, right?" It was one of those things that we just knew. My wife said, "Let's do this." And I said, "Let's do it." And we've never looked back. 30 years ago, it was a fluke for me, and doing something my wife always wanted to do. So we said, "Let's do it." We packed our kids up. We had $6,000 in the bank. We had no clue what Arizona was really about. We didn't know anybody here. And we found an apartment complex in Scottsdale that would take us and 2 kids in a apartment, and went to real estate school.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so many pivotal points in your life are because of your personal relationships and the people you've come into contact with, which I think is a beautiful thing. Really cool, John.
You make such a valid point, Tina, because the people that you meet, for whatever reason, they come into your life. Some may go out of your life, but they put you, and they made for whatever reason. And and you learn to capitalize on that. And real estate all these years has been incredible. Of course, the recession in 2007 and 8 was a tough time. And a lot of people in real estate had to figure out, okay, how am I going to do this? What am I going to do? And you just work through it.
Yeah.
And here we are 30 years later. It's just the hard work, the hard work.
So, can you pinpoint any of the skills that you developed or learned during your time serving our country that are applicable to your real estate career?
You asking that question, Tina, gives me chills. I've hired hundreds and hundreds of agents over the years because as a managing broker we had over 700 agents, and then I was a broker in Santa Barbara, 212 agents. Do you know one of the things I always look for? Agents that were coming brand new, especially brand new into the business, but also other seasoned agents. A very, very important thing you learn in the service is the discipline, is that discipline. And people say, well, John, what do you mean by the discipline? You're taught certain things in the military, which when you go into real estate, because it's just going to be you and your broker, you're pretty much, and Tina, you've been in this business a long time, you're working pretty much for yourself. That discipline is what carried me in the tough times getting started. I mean, gosh, I didn't know anybody. I had no sphere of influence, nothing here. We just act cold. I went out door knocking, and that discipline I had from the Marine Corps is what kept me out there. And people say, you door knocked in the heat, 112, 115, 118. Finally, I promised my wife I wouldn't go out door knocking anything over 115, but I'd be out there sweating.
Wow.
But that discipline that it carried me through that. And I said, that's what I looked for in agents when I hired them, is that discipline, because it's something special that you get. And going through boot camp, you learn that. And even as an officer candidate school, you still learn. And it's hard to teach somebody that, it gets instilled. I mean, you can,
Yeah.
but that's something that if I don't have to teach you that, I can teach you how to sell and so forth. That's one less thing. You can carry yourself through that. That's what I always look for, hiring agents, discipline that they have, because those are the ones that'll survive, because we have ups and downs in this business.
For
and
sure.
That discipline is going to carry. That's what I see.
Yeah, I think that's huge. So to piggyback that, any advice for service members considering real estate as a career, or for anyone maybe considering real estate, but particularly our active service members and veterans?
I do. And I would say to them, Tina, is trust in yourself that you can do this, because that's what we need that as an agent working, and you've already got that. You've got that. And I would say just trust what you have and go for it. My advice for them is just trust in yourself. Trust in yourself.
Yeah, I think that's great. What's one of your favorite things about being in the real estate industry?
There's so many different facets that you
So
can do
much,
in real
right?
estate.
Yeah.
Whether, and it's like for me, during the recession, I pivoted a little bit, started looking at maybe speaking training a little bit more, and it worked for me, and then became, as a manager, I think that because we have so many facets and different things that you can do, because you say, I don't know if I want to do the sell, but it's not just about selling. There's so many different things that somebody can do inside of real estate, and it probably will fit what you're looking for.
I think that is fabulous. I agree. There are a lot of different directions you can go within the real estate industry. So that's great. John, genuinely appreciate your time. And I know we work with a lot of veterans and a lot of active military personnel, and I think your insights are fabulous. So thank you so much. And
you're welcome. Thank you, Tina.
Yeah.
And I do. Come join us. We'll take care of you.
Absolutely.